This is a recent Johnny Harris video called Why I'll Never Use the Metric System. And you know what, I'll be honest, that is a very great title, good bait, definitely comes off as that stereotypical American that's like, I'll never use the metric, we use freedom units. But he's actually a very well-informed man, and I do highly recommend you watch his video if you haven't yet. But what caused me to make this video response, bringing it back, was his conclusion.
10 meters doesn't mean anything to me. What it means is 30 feet divided by 3. What I've really been doing this whole time is intuitively estimating things based on the system I know. I honestly cannot estimate what 50 meters looks like. I can't grasp what running 5 kilometers feels like. And so I'll never use the metric system. I don't know how. The ship has sailed on changing to metric here in the US for everyday people. It'll likely never happen.
Now, I do think it's an interesting conclusion, and it makes sense in his situation. Even when he's been trying to raise his kids and teach them the metric, imperial is all around them, so they're just going to speak imperially. Classic American imperialism. But when I started learning German, it wasn't until I moved to Munich for a full month and surrounded myself with the language and the culture where I was forced to use it and see it every day until it actually started to stick. And I think a very similar thing can happen regarding the metric system. And I'm a good case study for this because, as an interesting circumstance, I was also born and raised in the USOA, born and bred in the imperial system, a little bit of mix every once in a while, and I've moved to the UK, which is way more metric and occasionally dabbles in the old imperial. They put their imperialism behind them, kind of. But having been entrenched in the metric system for so long, do I necessarily agree with Johnny's conclusion for himself and possibly others? Not really. I think it really depends on which measurement we're taking. Such as, first off, let's talk temperature. I'm now fully on board with Celsius, and the UK is too. It's not one of those countries where they dabble a bit in both. No, they are fully on board with the Celsius train. In fact, I don't think any Brit really understands Fahrenheit at all, which is a shame, because even though I am now mostly a Celsius guy, I kind of understand why Fahrenheit exists. I'm not water, okay? Who among you can say the same? What? What do you mean? Water, you mean? What I mean is Celsius was made for water. 0 degrees is specifically tuned to when water freezes, and 100 is specifically tuned to when water boils. That's convenient, but I am not water, okay? I'm a human. And so the Fahrenheit system actually does have a perk in that the 0 to 100 mostly makes sense about weather. Like that's, for the most part, the weather you're going to experience. Sure, you could live up north and then, gosh, you're gonna go into the negatives, or you could live in Arizona and it could go so far into the hundreds that you wanna die. But it still makes a bit more sense for the human experience as opposed to only really being able to experience somewhere between -5 and 40. It just allows a bit more specificity when it comes to how you're feeling. 68 degrees Fahrenheit is a little bit different than 69 degrees Fahrenheit. Nice. Now that being said, sometime around the 7-year mark, as in I'd been living in the UK for 7 years, I switched. My brain just stopped thinking in Fahrenheit and actually just went, oh, we're just gonna ditch this information. We don't really need to understand what 68 or what 80 or what 50 means anymore. We're just gonna use the Celsius system, which means that when my mom asks me like, what's the temperature over there, honey? I don't know what to say, actually. I have to be like, I think it might be 60, maybe? I just don't know. My brain is now thinking 100% in Celsius. I'm not translating one or the other. And in fact, if anything, my base is now in Celsius. And that's after living here for over 10 years. I feel like I used to have a very simple system. You'd feel the temperature and be like, oh, this is light jacket weather or hoodie weather or coat weather. But now in the UK, as opposed to having it like lined up to being 30 to 60 and 60 to 70, now I just have 0 to 10, it's a coat. 10 to 15, it's a light jacket. 15 to 20, maybe a hoodie. And then anything over 20, I'm probably on holiday. I did get to 38 for one day last year, which I will always talk about because it is horrifying when that happens over here. The buildings are just not meant for that. And neither am I. That being said, I do still use Fahrenheit annoyingly with one thing and one thing alone: body temperature. I mean, man, I was sick, I guess, a lot as a kid because I know 98.6 degrees. This was a thermometer. Please don't think 98.6 degrees is the thermometer going in my mouth. I don't know what the Celsius is. I assume it's like 36 something, but I don't know. So if I were to take a thermometer out, I'd be like, okay, time to Google it because my brain's still thinking Fahrenheit. But in regards to everything else, I'm a Celsius first. And that's why I'm gonna have to give this one a tick for the metric system. And I don't even go into cooking, in which I do feel like Celsius benefits cooking so much more. But I feel like cooking actually has even more benefits in the next section. Let's go to the kitchen, see what I'm cooking up. Don't worry, you won't have to wait too much longer to hear about the next topic. It's wait Now when it comes to weight, I have fully switched over to metric, and this has been by far the easiest switch of the bunch. Each and every morning I wake up, I weigh myself on my scale, and that is in kilograms. When I go to the gym, all the weights are also in kilograms. Sometimes, some gyms I've been to, they will have the pounds in parentheses, but for the most part, kilograms is right there in your face, and so I know I can squat 80 kilograms. It is a lot cooler to say I can squat 180 pounds, but that's just because, you know, bigger number, bigger muscles. Bigger disappointment in myself. Now, Americans may be bullied for using pounds, but the UK has an even weirder system for measuring their own weight. For some reason, people over here will walk on the side of the road and look at a pile of rocks and go, "Oh, that's a bit of me right there. I weigh about 12 stone. Really? Wow, okay. So instead of, sticking with the metric system, they just look at some rocks and they go, "That's me. 12 stone. If you didn't know, 14 pounds is in 1 stone. 14? I know it's historic, but come on guys, let's fully switch over to the metric system, please. The stone stuff, absolutely crazy. You have no right to bully Americans for not using the metric system while you're still using this stone thing, like you're in the Stone Ages. Anyway, when it comes to weight, one thing the metric system absolutely kills it for, ding-a-dong, is cooking. Jesse, let's cook. Because with cooking, this is by far the biggest benefit you can get from switching to the metric system. Whenever I cook or bake a cake or something, I'm using a scale and measuring everything in grams because I'm not a barbarian. Sure, there are a lot of American cooking YouTubers out there who have an insistence to use the imperial system going, "Oh yeah, you wanna make this cake? Just put in, I don't know, half a cup of butter." Half a cup of butter? I'm sorry, how much do I jam it in there? There's like air gaps. How is that supposed to be precise? You could have half a cup of butter one day, half a cup of butter the next day. They could be off by at least, 10% by weight. You could have densely packed sugar. I'm sorry, I had a recipe the other day, literally for this cake, that was like, use a half cup of densely packed brown sugar. How dense are you? Just switch to the metric system. Luckily, a lot of these cooking YouTubers, they have put the Celsius, they have put the grammage, they have put the volume in the corner for us normal folk who like, precision, because cooking is an art, sure, but it is also very much like a science. Do you really want to replicate that recipe to make it exactly as they do? Well, you know what would make that easier? If you had the exact same ratios as they do, as opposed to just kind of going, I hope this, 3 1/2 cup tablespoons of butter is enough. No! It is indefensible. That is my hill. I'm dying on some hills today. Tablespoon, half cup, 1/8 cup. What are you doing? Even if you're an American, this is one thing I just find indefensible. There is no defense for using this weird, wacky imperial system when it comes to cooking. And if you're an American and you've had issues with baking and cooking and following a recipe, I can tell you it's not your fault. It is your system's fault. I'd like to believe there's some sort of alternate timeline in which I never left the US, and I think that version of Evan would actually be agreeing with me right now, but only in regards to cooking. But when it comes to cooking, if you really just want to make sure there is no room for error, there is no reason to use the imperial. Because using that system of measurement will be making an imperial big mistake. And so in regards to weight, I can't help but give the metric system a really big tick for this one. And though I do understand both systems of metric and imperial when it comes to weight, I guess you could say I go both ways. Please don't unsubscribe. All right, time for some cake. I hope you can appreciate, I've been working on my audio quite a bit recently, so even in a big room like this, you don't have to crank up the volume too much. That's right, we're talking about volume, but the other kind. The UK and the US dabble in the metric system and the imperial both. They're both very, very guilty here. When a British person is driving, they'll buy their petrol by the liter, as opposed to the US where we buy it by the gallon, and it's gasoline. But when it comes to the shops, oh boy, it gets even more confusing. You want to get some soda in the States? How big do you want it? A 2 liter or a 20 ounce? What? They mix it up? In the UK, it's similar, except it's 2 liters and liter. Okay, we're sticking on the metric. And then, of course, when you get a small can of soda, it's 330 milliliters. Cool. The metric system makes sense. 330 is a bit obscure, though. You can tell that's probably just translated from the US company's imperial measurements, but it makes sense. Where it stops making sense and starts to fall apart completely is when you're starting to talk about alcohol and milk, the 2 favorite drinks of Brits. But here's where the imperial system in both countries gets very screwy. You'd know about this if you watched my video on US versus UK grocery prices, but let me just break it down for you. In the US, 8 fluid ounces is in a cup, the imperial measurement we all decided to use. In the UK, it's actually 10 fluid ounces. But things get even more weird, because in the US, it's 2 cups a pint, 2 pints a quart. Quart is short for quarter gallon, so 4 quarts to a gallon, you're done. In the UK, even though they invented the system, it's actually a bit more different in that it is 2 cups to a pint. They ignore quarts. Nobody I've met here even knows what a quart is. And they go, 4 pints. Actually, just sell milk by the 4 pints. Wah? Which is a half gallon. But yes, half gallon. Rarely will I ever see a gallon. But I guess they say, America likes it big, and so we've got the gallon. And then I guess if you think about it, the half gallon here is a little bit more than a half gallon in the States, so But I think the UK should get on board with the quart. I find it so interesting that so many Brits, they're aware of pints in terms of how much can get them pissed or how much milk to buy at the shops, but they don't understand anything about the imperial besides pints. That being said, I do still think a lot more in regards to the metric system because it's just so much superior when it comes to cooking for volume. And so therefore, I'm going to have to give myself a big tick for the volume for metric. Just because I am not measuring using cups and half tablespoons and anything. That is just jokes. And I know we've talked a lot about the imperial, and that's just because I do still have a full understanding of it in regards to volume. With temperature, I got it a little bit iffy. With volume, oh no, I understand both. But my brain is sticking with the metric for the most part in terms of what my first thought is on how much is in something. It's not fully though. It's definitely got a little bit of like, how many cups is that still in the brain? In the old noggin. Anyway, I'm gonna eat this cake and then I'm gonna go for a run. And the final category we're gonna be talking about today is distance and speed. This is another one that didn't really come naturally to me because so much of my brain was really wired towards the imperial. But it wasn't until I got into fitness and running that it really just started to click. I wasn't doing a couch to 3.2K, was I? It's a couch to 5K. So when I bought my first Apple Watch, it defaulted to the metric system, which initially annoyed the heck out of me. But the thing was, I was trying to run 5K, so I tried to force myself into the metric, even though I just felt like it was an inferior and shorter mile. But the more runs I went on, the more I started to understand. Ooh, okay, that's about a 6-minute distance away if I were running. The more walks I'd go on. I'd just see kilometers all the time until my brain just started to get it. Now, that being said, I'm about to say the most American thing you've probably ever heard me say. I may have adjusted to the metric system when it comes to distances and such, but I still use football fields as a referential point. It just makes a lot of sense to me. I even said it in a travel vlog in Madeira the other day. Cave number 2, and this one is 200 meters long. 2 football fields for you Americans out there. It just allows me to understand a bit more. And even when I'm talking about height, I feel like I also go with basketball nets. A basketball hoop is about 10 feet or 3 meters high, so I can kind of gauge it. Or if something's shorter than that, I usually go with a mkii system. I'm about 2 meters, a little bit less, so how many mkis is it? Is it 1 mkii laying down? Is it half of mkii? Is it 2.5 of mkii? Does that make sense? I feel like that is more referential, and so is better than in the imperial and the metric in terms of intuition. But I do default to the metric still. It's just the metric system is better. Pause for plane, pause for plane. That is a big plane. Now, if you thought for distance this was gonna be a complete wash for the metric system, you'd be wrong. Sure, on foot, I do prefer the metric system. It makes more sense. But as soon as you get me behind the wheel of a car, it all goes out the window of the car. I do not understand what a kilometer is as soon as I'm driving because I've not really driven in many metric countries. I have, but I'm translating it constantly. Also, I don't even know what a mile is, 5,000 yards or something? That's not very intuitive, and yet that's just what I think of when I'm driving, like how many miles, how long until I get to this, whereas as soon as it's like 110 kilometers per hour, I genuinely don't even know what that's supposed to be. Like, I've driven in some countries like that, but 99% of my experience has been in New Jersey or California or Louisiana doing road trips in the States. So that's just the way my mind works, and I'd have to drive a lot more in a metric country before that would change. And as the UK isn't a metric country on the roads, I don't know about that. Pause for boat, pause for crime. Oh my God, is that a seal? And so for this one, I think I'm definitely gonna have to give a tick to both the metric and the imperial system, just because that's the way my mind works. I use each for a different reason, and I am actually translating it, so I can't give the full point to the metric system. So I understand where Johnny's coming from a bit more now. It is a seal. Oh my God, look at him. Oh my God, hello. Oh my God, that's so cool. And so the part of Johnny Harris's video where he concludes that it would be impossible for him to switch to the metric system because he's constantly switching back and translating the numbers from metric to imperial, and he didn't even know what 5K meant, and he was translating that, my only reasoning with that could be, I don't think he really tried. Like, I know he says he tried, but the 5K thing, I'm like, that? But either way, it's not really his fault. He's working against the grain in a country that it is impossible for him to immerse himself in the language of metric with. So it was really not going to be easy either way, so it doesn't really make sense for him to keep trying. But when Johnny concludes that the ship has sailed for Americans switching to the metric system, I've got to strongly disagree. If the US government did switch to the metric system and join the rest of modern day society, most Americans, which I know this is gonna hurt you to hear it, aren't that special compared to everywhere else. There's some sort of American exceptionalism going on where it's like, oh, it wouldn't work for Americans because we're just different. No, everybody else also switched. And guess what? Everybody got used to it and experienced all the benefits. And Americans are no different. They would experience it just like I did moving to the UK. They would be annoyed at first to be like, I don't understand this Celsius thing. And then eventually they'd be like, oh, wow, I can cook finally. I just think it's a really bad take to say the ship has sailed when the ship is still moored to the dock. But if you've moved from any imperial country, pretty much the US, to anywhere else, I would love to hear from you in the comments if you have a very similar experience. But Johnny and I actually have more in common than you'd think. For instance.
Well, this week we're actually both sponsored by the same company, mkii. I feel like every other month or so I get an email telling me that my private data's just been sold on the darknet by some guy named Shrek. I actually don't know if that's his name, but I remember there being onions involved. But it just gets frustrating at this point. I deal with enough spam emails and robocalls no matter how much I try and protect my data, so I've just kind of given up at this point, because even though we do have the right to request these private companies and data brokers that have all been just basically collecting all of our private data to use it for marketing purposes, we have the right to request they delete it. There's just so many of them, and they're always popping up here and there, and somehow they've gotten my data, that it's just a bit overwhelming. But that's why the video sponsor, mkii, has actually stepped up to provide a solution. All you have to do, it's this simple, is give them consent to request deletion on your behalf, and they are immediately hopped off to the races. They've already gotten 50 brokers requesting to delete my data from their servers. And I just signed up within a couple days, so that's kind of crazy. And the way that mkii works is it's always on a recurring basis. So that way, when any of these new ones pop up to try and get your data, well, no. You've got your data secure. And don't worry, mkii has a 30-day risk-free guarantee. So if you do not like it, well, you can get your money back. And if you do, be sure to click my link in the description to get 60% off a plan of mkii. Wow, what a deal. Anyway, thanks mkii for sponsoring. Let's wrap up the video.
Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I just found out from my YouTube analytics that the majority of people watch my videos on a TV, which makes me so happy because I've been spending so much time making the production really good. The fact that it's no longer mobile, but TV? Oh, thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying what you're watching. I don't use the imperial much, I use it rarely. In fact, I use the metric on the daily. Not scary, don't let Johnny Harris make you wary. At least use it in the kitchen, please. Thanks for watching.